pharmacy. I'd finished my schooling in Wales because I was evacuated to Wales. You know what it is to be evacuated there because of the war. And I was just a young girl of 17, and I met and fell in love with this very handsome officer in the Czechoslovak army. And he was just before going on a mission, on a very special mission. He was a parachutist to the Soviet Union, and then from the Soviet Union into Slovakia to join the national uprising, Slovak national uprising. And he disappeared on the mission, and for 15 months I had no news of him. Only I received a telegram that he was missing, believed killed in action on the Polish Dukla pass between Slovakia and Dukla. Then the war ended. In between, he'd returned to Slovakia. He'd become a partisan in the Slovak mountains, and eventually, when war was, the end of the war. What do you call it in English? When the war ends? No? Who can tell me in English? There. No, when peace was declared, he eventually got back to England, and he became the Slovak Assistant Military and Air Attaché in London. We re-met and married. We were in London for 2 years, then we came back to Prague, and then the problem started. You know that in 1948 there was the changeover. The Czechoslovakia became a socialist country.
Can I ask you?
Yes, please.
You were talking about your husband, what he was doing during the period, but what were you doing during this war period?
Well, I was a student of pharmacy.
Okay.
I'd finished my education. I wanted to study to be a pharmacist, but also the war was still on, as you know, from 1944 to 1945. I was a voluntary Red Cross nurse, a VAD, and I have visited the international school in uniform several times, possibly in some films or photos that you've maybe seen me there in this uniform. There. So, what else would you like to ask some questions?
And I've heard about you that you worked for the Red Cross during
Yes,
the war. Is
yes,
that true?
that's true. Yes, I was in the hospital, but I did every week 8 hours duty, voluntary, dobrovolné there, and that was helping in the hospital because there weren't so many nurses. The nurses had gone to ships or to airports or other places. Air bases, not airports, and joined the forces. But I was still young, I was then 17, 18, and so I didn't become that I'd be in the forces yet. But all my family were members of the forces. My father worked in the Air Ministry, was an official position. My mother was a voluntary driver in the army for a year or two. My older sister was a mechanic and a driver in the army, like Princess Elizabeth was during the war. The general mentioned her, and Colonel Pica, who you'll meet, mentioned that they met Princess Elizabeth when she was in uniform as a mechanic or a driver in the army. My other sister, we were 4 children, 4 siblings. My other sister was in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAFs, and we all married people in the Army, the Air Force, or in the Navy. We all had service weddings, we can say. We all married, our husbands were in uniform, 1945, 1946. They're quite romantic. I came to Prague in October 1947, when my husband was recalled from the embassy in London. And I was expecting my first baby, and I wanted to return to England, but February 1948 was the takeover by the communists. Czechoslovakia became a social republic, and all, particularly officers that had been serving in the West with the Allied forces. They all had problems. They were imprisoned, or they were released from the army, or put into prison. I mentioned that, or they were sent to do some hard labour somewhere, because they were unreliable and they had sympathies with the West there. My husband was demanded that he divorce that British woman, which was me, and he refused. He refused to join the Communistic Party, and from Prague we had to leave Prague, and he returned to Slovakia because he was Slovak, and it was he'd started his army career in Slovakia, studied in Banská Bystrica, and so he was returned to his base, original army base there, so that we came to live in Zvolen, which is near Banská Bystrica. Maybe you will have heard of it there. And then our problems started. We lived in an army flat. Then we were his own soldiers came and moved belongings out into the snow in December 1949. So then the problem started. Secret police, house inspections, all my English books were taken. I was left with only my Bible, which I had wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. Wtedy nebyl plastic, only vrecko, ale oilcloth. And I had it up the chimney. Do kominy jsem to schovala. No tak to mi jsem zachránila. That was my only source of English there. We spoke English at home. My children, I have 2 sons, learned and understood English before they knew Slovak. But out in the streets, it was taboo, really, to speak English, because you'd have someone coming and making problems. So I survived. Unfortunately, my husband's 12 years dead. There, he was older, 13 years older than I was, so that today he would be over 90. And I'm still going strong there.
We've heard actually that you received Order of the British Empire.
That's true.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, that's true. From the Queen, I didn't want to outshine anybody here today, so that I haven't anything on me, as you see. But tonight will be a banquet, and I'll wear a miniature, not the original thing, it's quite big. Yes, that was a great honour, and that was for my services that I've been teaching and telling people for years and years, more than 43 years, advising and teaching people more or less secretly English culture, English way of life, writers, especially Shakespeare and Cronin and people like that, so that our students were familiar with Western culture, Western ideas, Western literature, and also life during the war. That I know in Slovakia was very difficult. They were occupied more or less, particularly the Czech Republic, was Czechoslovakia, but Slovakia was a Slovak state, as you know. And I was sort of in a nice way, and in a way that they could spread it amongst their friends or with their families, the Western culture and different life in the West, freedom there. And that people like my husband and the veterans you see here, they fought for freedom. They fought that the young people today, that you exist and that you have freedom, that you can travel, you can study abroad, you can work abroad. And in my days, I wasn't allowed to go home for 9.5 years. I was more or less here in exile, not permitted to travel. Yeah, I see that you've got some questions prepared, so let's answer your questions.
I know that the war period was horrible, but did you have any pleasant memories?
Of course, I have pleasant memories of a wonderful husband, 2 beautiful children, we liked to do, my husband was a sportsman, he'd been a football player, then he became a tennis. There was no such thing as having a car in those days, what wasn't possible with bicycles. So we went into the country, cycling, swimming, and that sort of kept a sort of even balance between the good and the evil, let's say, there. But I always held my head up proudly, and I never sort of let people know that we are, we're, wait a minute, what is it? That we are being tread on, that we weren't allowed to have decent wages. My husband was sent to the mines to work. He wasn't allowed to do an office job for a long time. Then from his war wounds he was so bad suffering that he couldn't do underground work in the mines. So that in the end he got permission to work in an office there. But there was always the threat that you will still have to go somewhere to do some manual work, to be a labourer or something. And I became in a workshop sewing for the railway workers, clothes for the railway workers. I had to do something because then there was no health services, there was no help for your children, benefit for that, so what to live on there. Okay, some other question?
What was your biggest accomplishment?
Receiving my OBE. Or should I say first of all, marrying a wonderful man and the birth of my children, obviously, there. And another very important step was my first visit back to my homeland in 1956, after 9.5 years there. I came to the airport in London, was then, that was Heathrow already, before it was previously Croydon. And I remember that I walked, gave my passport, and I had a Czechoslovak passport because I wasn't allowed a British passport. And there was written UK passports and aliens. Yeah? And I didn't go to the aliens with my Czech passport, I went to the British passport thing. And the man looked at me and he said, "Oh, you were born near London in Essex." I said, "Yes." He said, "That's all right, you can go." I didn't have to go to the aliens, and with the Czech, that was remarkable because with the Czechoslovak passport he saw that my birth, that I'm British, and that was okay there. But I could only stay in Britain for 3 weeks, and he said, "That's all right, you can remain here." But that wasn't possible because I had to sign that I will return to Czechoslovakia because my husband was in Czechoslovakia and one of my sons. I always had to leave deposit one of my children. Wasn't allowed two together to go home to Britain. So those are big moments. Yeah. And I remember coming out of the airport and seeing a policeman standing there. And I had a job not to go and hug him. A British policeman, suddenly to see after, for nearly 10 years you hadn't seen a British policeman. And it's a symbol, isn't it, of Great Britain there. Or suddenly to travel through London. I'd lived in London when my husband was in the embassy in the centre of London. And suddenly to see the double-decker buses, that was fantastic, and all the lights in Piccadilly Circus. I mean, that was a welcome home there. So those were very important and very big moments. I get emotional. I'm sorry. Yes, please.
Can you remember what was it like to be awarded the OBE by Queen?
Well, it was very moving. And I remember that the orchestra, the band in Buckingham Palace started playing from Smetana music there. And that suddenly for me was very symbolic because from Czechoslovakia music and playing suddenly Dvorak's music music or from Smetana, that for me that was really very nice and very sort of symbolic to be there. I was accompanied by one of my sons and his British wife, and also by the Slovak military attaché, because it was exactly 60 years to the day that my husband had been the military assistant military attaché in London, in the job that the military attaché Dunaj, I asked him to accompany. And this is the Slovak-British sort of relationship that I've always tried to bring the Slovaks into contact with the British, or the British into contact with the Slovaks. Something else, please?
I wanted to ask you, you were talking about your memories from the war period, but do you have any from the pre-war period?
1918?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't.
No, I'm not talking about the First War. Talking about
The Second World War.
Your memories from the pre-war period.
Your
from the
childhood.
Yeah, from my childhood.
Yeah, childhood.
Well, my father had been an officer in the army in the First World War, and we sort of were brought up, 4 children, and we were brought up in a nice middle-class family with respect for one's elders. Father is the head of the family. There now, a little bit now, things have changed. It's more modernised. I think mother's taking over the sort of the trousers, shall we say. But we were brought up a little differently. And I mentioned in an article or in an interview that the Queen is 1 year older than I am. And her sister is 3 years younger. She's not alive now. And we actually were brought up with great respect for King George V, the father, then Edward, as you know, who abdicated, Prince Edward, then this royal family. And we were brought up that the princesses, they would be very correct. They learned to play the piano, they learned to behave in public, and that was a sort of, you mustn't do that, you mustn't run, instead of, you should go walking, and you should wait and hold the doors open, which in Slovakia, unfortunately, men don't do this often enough, and they sort of let the door bang on you. And I had this experience yesterday, was pulling a case, and a man opened the door and banged it on me, and I nearly fell over with the case. So that, I think there's a lot to be said for people's manners on here. They should have better manners here. Unfortunately, women are not being so respected now by men as they were in the past, because the women want to be on equal terms, exactly, and sometimes you lose your effeminacy by letting to becoming on equal terms. And to be honest, your boys, remember this, you don't really like it. The boys like that they're going to look after the girl and to open the door for her or invite her somewhere. And I think that, maybe it's old-fashioned, but I think that it belongs a little bit to your education, and I think that's there. So.
And we have one last question for
Yes.
us, very important.
Yes.
If you could state one piece of advice for us and for future generations, something that you have learned through your life, what would it be? Some advice for us?
Well, I'll tell you a Slovak expression. My husband was really just before his death, and he knew that what we'd lived through and gone through. And he told me this: never have butter on your head. And I think that is a very good, in English, it means if you know you are right and you are correct, stand up for it. You know, have courage, face facts. That is exactly the English translation. Always face facts. Okay? Okay, so enjoy your lives, look forward to your freedom, travel, because travelling can sometimes be even more important, then an extra year at school, you know, have a break. What is it called? It's terrible today, I'm forgetting my English. Have a, is it a Soborn, or what is it you call it when you have a break out of something, a rest from school before you continue your higher studies?
Gap year? Gap year?
A gap year, that's American, yeah, but there's another expression just at the minute it's come out of me there. Have a break between finishing your education, general education, your matriculation, yeah, school leaving examinations, A-levels. Before you go to study, have a year out and travel. Yeah? Go and visit. Don't be afraid to do some work. Be a secretary, do anything. Look after children. Very important. You learn a lot from children there. But be a driver or do something there. And then you might have changed your mind. I wanted to study psychology. I wanted to study language. Then you might say, no, I think I'll change it. I'm going to become a doctor or a specialist or something else, or a diplomat. Yes, you can suddenly find out, being amongst people and especially foreigners. Yeah, I see life slightly differently when I've been travelling and looking around and something like that. So enjoy your freedom, be happy, enjoy your lives, go dancing, skating, do sports, something interesting. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Yeah. And always be kind and nice to elderly people. I think that is, because they respect it and they need you. Elderly people like young people, and they'll listen to you. Maybe they'll give you advice. Okay, you can take it with a pinch of salt. That can be, yes, it was a good idea. Maybe later you realise it was a damn good idea. Okay, be happy.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. There. Maybe I told you something of interest. If it was something you didn't like or personal, I'm sorry.
It was amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, be happy.
We are.
And that's the main thing. Enjoy life.
Thank you
Okay?
very
Thank you very much.
Okay, it was nice meeting you. Fine. Okay. Bye bye. Enjoy yourself. Take care. Yeah, enjoy your school.